Hello, my name is Jim Smith. I am a chaplain, volunteer chaplain at the Harris County Jail in Houston, Texas. I have been recording some lessons that I teach at the jail so that my students, when they get out of jail, can go and look up the other lessons and finish the full course. This series of lessons is called Foundations for Christian Doctrine. The one that I'm going to teach now is called Anthropology. It's the seventh in a series of lessons, and it's the first in a series on anthropology. You may go to my introductory video to get some background on the course. So with that, let's talk about anthropology. The Greek word anthro means man, and of course the OLOGY at the end of the word means study of. So anthropology is a study of man. If you take anthropology in college, it's a huge course. Covers history and culture and a lot of different things. I'm only going to do a little bitty bit of anthropology. We're going to talk about creation of the universe, and of course creation of man, and how did man get here. When I wrote my book, Build on the Rock, I left out the subject of creation. And the reason is because it is so controversial. There's so much passion about it. I just didn't want to get into the weeds. I knew I would make somebody upset if I put creation in my book, so I just left it out. As it turns out, creation is not really science, it's religion. We all have our worldview of how things came into being, and we stick with that as we would religion. So we get very passionate about it. We can get angry about it. There have even been wars started over religion. And again, we don't necessarily think at first of creation as religion, but it really gets down to that. What's the saying? Don't talk about religion or politics. Well, I'm about to talk about it, I guess. One of the problems that scientists have is that we're real good at measuring what's going on right now. I can measure the length of my desk. I can measure an atom and what's going on in an atom, or two chemical reactions that take place as I'm working on them. But to measure what happened 10,000 years ago or a million years ago, we have to do some assumptions. And there is some little trail of science there, but not as much as if you're measuring it right now. And so those assumptions aren't always correct, and we end up with false conclusions. So that's a problem for science. The other thing I mentioned, that creation is like religion, and unfortunately some people are so adamant about their position that they'll cheat. If you've ever heard of the Piltdown Man, there's a guy named Charles Dawson who found a skull, or at least claimed he found a skull in 1913 in Piltdown, England. As it turns out, he died in 1916 and kind of hid, or his secret died with him. And it wasn't until 1953 that they finally concluded this fossil that he had was not the real thing. If you've ever heard of the missing link, archaeologists have been spending a lot of time trying to find that link, that fossil that's part human and part ape. And the fossil that Dawson produced, as it turned out, had a human skull or cranium and an orangutan jaw. And he created it. He put it together, and he put chimpanzee teeth in the jaw. And then he aged it so that when people examined it, they thought it was the real deal. And it wasn't until they developed some additional techniques some 40 years later that they discovered he cheated. And I don't know how many other fossils might really be something that's forged. Another problem that science has is we sometimes come up with misinterpreting the data. And by the way, I was a chemist and an engineer with Shell Oil for my whole career. I call myself a scientist, so I'm kind of criticizing myself here when I say some of these things. But there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made, and sometimes those assumptions are inaccurate. If you ever heard of the Nebraska man, I'm just giving you one example. There are many, but the Nebraska man, a man found a tooth in Nebraska. I think it was about 1917, and archaeologists began to use that tooth to develop an idea of what this man looked like. And they had artist renderings, the head, the whole man, feet, legs, arms, the whole thing, based on this tooth. And it wasn't till 10 years later that someone said, you know what, that tooth is really a pig's tooth. It's not a man's tooth at all. And again, they thought they had the missing link, the connection between the ape and the man. So anxious to prove that evolution that they kind of ignore some things. So again, that's one of the reasons I'm reluctant. I was reluctant to put it in my book, and I give you all that background as I start to talk about creation. I could sit here and tell you this is the way it was. But if I do, it's only my opinion. We really don't know actually how the universe was created. We have some hypothesis about it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 different hypotheses. There are many more. In fact, I say there's as many hypotheses about creation as there are people. But these would probably be the major ones. And I'll expose these to you. And in the final analysis, you're going to have to make up your own mind about what you think is the truth about creation. And I should maybe preface this by saying for a long time, I didn't think creation really mattered. You give your life to Jesus Christ. It doesn't really matter how the world got here or how man got here. And that is true. And we always have to keep that in mind. But I discovered that creation, at least among, I'll call the educated people, the story in Genesis of how that all occurred seems so preposterous that people say, you know what, I don't think the Bible's true, and maybe God doesn't really exist. And I discovered that it is one of the huge roadblocks to believing in God. And so with that, I realize we need to talk about it. So the first hypothesis I want to talk about is what we call young Earth creation. If you get on the internet and read it, you'll find that guys like Henry Morris, Dwayne Gish, Ken Ham, Kent Hovind have a lot of material on the internet about the institution of creation research and young Earth creation. I've read a book by Henry Morris about it. I've looked on the internet at other things about young Earth creation. So if you're a young Earth creationist, you would say the Earth is about 6,000 years old. And you determine that by the genealogy in the Bible. The Bible's been very good at saying Adam lived 900 and some years, and his son lived 900 and some years, and so forth. 1,000 years or so. And then we get Noah and Abraham and Moses and all those, and you can determine the genealogy, and you can determine how old the Earth was from Adam, who was the first man. And maybe there's a couple of gaps in that genealogy, so some people said, well, it could be as much as 10,000 years. But for talking purpose, we'll say 6,000 years. Young Earth creationists say God created the universe in 6 24-hour days. And you'll see, if you read the first chapter of Genesis, it'll say evening and morning one day, evening and morning the second day, and so forth. And so young Earth creationists say, well, that's a 24-hour day. It's talking about evening and morning. A very important fact is young Earth creationists say, well, the Earth and the universe was created with apparent age. And as you read Genesis, you realize when God created plants, for instance, he didn't create little seeds or seedlings that are just sprouting and starting to grow. He created full-grown plants. He created trees, which, if you cut that tree down that day, you probably would have tree rings. You might have concluded, well, it's 200 years old, from the tree rings, even though it had just been created that day. And animals weren't little eggs or little minnows or whatever. They were full-grown animals. Adam wasn't a little child. He was, they estimate, in his 30s when he was created. So there's a lot of things, according to young Earth creationists, that appear to be older than they really were. And maybe even the rocks and the dirt and so forth, the stars, etc., may be, when they were created to look millions or billions of years old. Life was created by God after its kind. Now, that expression, after its kind, is talking about the genus of the species. So what does that mean? That means that apple trees don't produce oranges. Lions don't turn into tigers. Fish don't turn into reptiles, and so forth. It stays its genus. A fish stays a fish. A tiger stays a tiger. It doesn't evolve into some other genus. Man was created on the sixth day. The fossil record that was formed, that archaeologists dig up, they say it was all formed during the Noah's flood. It was not formed over millions of years, as evolutionists would say. Satan came to earth after Adam and Eve. And you'll see in Genesis, it often says, at the end of the day, God will say, and it's good. In fact, at the end, he says it's very good. Now, if God says it's good or it's very good, in my mind, to me, it's going to be perfect. So if Satan was here, I don't think he would say, well, that's good. I think Satan came somewhere between the time that Adam was created and Eve eating of the apple, or at least that's the way the young Earth creationists would see it. I want to go through Genesis chapter 1, and I want to read it the way a young Earth creationist would read it, so that you can get a feel for how they would interpret the first chapter of Genesis. So let me start with chapter 1, verse 1. It says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So when we talked about apologetics, we talked about the Big Bang Theory, we said, well, when the universe was created, all of a sudden we have space created, we have matter created, and we have time created. So here we have that in the first verse. In the beginning, that would be when time started. And then we see God created the heavens and the earth. The heavens aren't necessarily that word where we're going someday when we die. In the Bible, a lot of times, heavens is talking about the sky or space. And so we can see it's created. The earth represents matter that's created. So we can see kind of that Big Bang Theory in verse 1. Verse 2, the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. The Spirit of God, we see, this is the first reference to Holy Spirit that we see in the Bible. The earth was formless and void, meaning there were no mountains, there were no valleys, there were no rivers, lakes. It was just flat. There was water over the surface, but there's no topography beyond that. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. So what happens here? Light represents energy, if you will. And so God created the concept of light. He created it. It doesn't say where it comes from at this point. Could be it came from God, because people will say that, this time when they go to heaven and come back, that they see a bright light. We see a bright light when Moses is on the mountain getting the Ten Commandments. God appears as a blinding light. So perhaps the light was coming from God at this point. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. So not only create that concept of light, but he created the concept of no light or darkness. And so that's kind of how we see evening and morning. There's darkness and there's light for the day. He calls it day and night. In verse 6, then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And you first read that, you'll separate the waters from the waters. What is he talking about? Well, what he's talking about is he separated the water that was on the surface of the earth. And some of it he put up into the sky, what we call clouds. Okay, so we know there's a lot of water up there. We can get rains of, well, here in Houston, we had a rain that was 30 inches of rain. That's a lot of water falling. Some water still on the earth, and some water up in the sky, clouds. And the expanse is the air or the sky between the two, between the surface of the earth and those clouds. Verse 7, God made the expanse, and he separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning a second day. Now I see this evening and morning, another day. And that's why the young earth creationists say that must be a 24-hour day, just like we have today. Verse 9, then God said, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. So now he's making oceans and dry land, continents, separating those. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Still seeing it's good at this point. Verse 11, then God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit after their kind with seed in them. And it was so. Here we see this plants being created. And it says they had seed in the fruit. Fruit and seeds are going to be on mature plants. And it says after its kind. And we'll see this several times here in Genesis chapter 1, where it says after its kind, meaning it stayed the same genus. It didn't evolve into some other genus. In verse 12, the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed after their kind, and the trees bearing fruit with seed in them after their kind. And God saw that it was good. Again, we would say good, that's perfect, huh? And in our mind, it probably would be. And there was evening, and was morning, a third day. So the plants were created in the third day. And then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So now he's placing stars like our sun, the moon, and all those stars. He's placing them in the sky. He says, let it be for signs and seasons. We know that the earth revolves around its axis every 24 hours. We call that a day. The moon goes around the earth once a month. We call that a month. The earth revolves around the sun once a year. So these are signs and seasons, these stars and these where they're placed and how they're moving give us the signs and the seasons. We know before GPS that you got your sextant out at night and you were able to determine where you were. You could navigate by the stars. So they are signs and they're useful for navigation. In verse 15 he says, and let there be and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. So there's some light from those stars. If you turn out all the city lights, you can see it. I grew up on a farm, and on a clear night, boy, you can just see somebody painted a big broad stripe across the sky called the Milky Way. And it's very obvious when there's a full moon and all the light stars are out, when there's no city lights around, I could walk around outside. You could see there was some light even at night. God, let's see, verse 16, God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, which is the sun, and the lesser light to govern the night, which is the moon. And he made the stars also. And God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So here is another day that's passed. Huh? And now he's this light that he created on the first day. Now it's coming from the suns and the stars and the moon. Huh? So before that it wasn't, but now it is. Verse 19, there was evening and there was morning, a fourth day. Go to verse 20, and we're going to get some real action. Then God said, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. So now what's happening? Well, he's putting fish in the oceans, and he's putting birds in the sky to fly in the sky, or it calls the expanse in my Bible. And then God created the great sea monsters. We speculate they're whales, but they could have been dinosaurs. And every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. So here again, we got the after its kind. The plants first, and now the animals are after their kind. They don't evolve into something else. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. It's the first time he says, be fruitful and multiply. He wants them to have babies and lay eggs, and for them to populate the earth. And there was evening and morning, a fifth day. And verse 24, and then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. So now what's he doing? He's creating animals after their kind. Okay, again, they don't evolve. And he's creating land animals, all right? So he's got cattle in the Bible. When it says cattle, it doesn't necessarily mean a cow. It means domestic animals. And when it says wild beasts, that's the other wild beasts that are not domesticated, huh? God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. These creeping things, probably insects and reptiles and snakes and things like that. And then God said, this is verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Here we see an evidence of the Trinity. Let us make man in our image. Those are plural words. He didn't say, let me make man in my image. He says us. And again, young Earth Christians or anyone, I guess, that reads the Bible would recognize that this is talking about the Trinity. The three persons, one God. He also says, let us make man in our image. When I was a young Christian, I said, someday I'm going to die. I'm going to go up to heaven. I'm going to meet God. And he's in my image. So he's going to be a man. And I imagine he's going to be an old man. And he's going to have a long white beard that goes down to the ground or something like that. That was my image of what God was going to be. Because he's made in, I'm made in his image. It wasn't until years later that I discovered, I started thinking about it. I said, God's a spirit. He's not a physical being. He's a spirit. When it says made in our image, he's talking about the immaterial things. We have language, we have emotions, will, intellect, we appreciate art, things like that. Those are immaterial things, not the material physical body. So that's what he's talking about when he says, let's make man in our image. And he also says, let's have him rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky and the animals on earth. Our job as man is to be the ruler, to take care of the earth and take care of everything, to rule it. We domesticate animals, wild animals. We either catch them with a fishing rod or we shoot them or capture them in some way. We rule over the earth. And God created, as verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Again, that's a controversial verse. Male and female, he created them, because today's society and our culture, we recognize all sorts of other, binary and non-binary and so forth. And it gets confusing when it's just male and female that he says. And that creates a lot of angst and disagreement. Verse 28, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So again, we have this ruling. Verse 29, then God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. So guess what? Adam and Eve were vegetarians. Early man was a vegetarian. He ate plants. He didn't eat meat. It was much later that he finally ate meat. Verse 30, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and everything that moves on the earth, which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. So again, young earth creationists would say, interpreting this, man was a vegetarian and animals were vegetarians. There were no carnivores. They all ate plants. And it probably wasn't all that the fear and animosity between animals and man. Huh? We probably lived without a fear. Verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. It was very good. Even better than those goods that he had before. Huh? He had created something that was just right. Very good. It was perfect. And we talk about they're living in the Garden of Eden. It was paradise. No death, no disease. Everything was perfect. I'm going to read a few verses here of chapter 2. It says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. In this particular case, when it talks about hosts, it's talking about the stars in the sky. And by the seventh day, God completed his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had done. We're in the seventh day, and it says he rested. It doesn't mean he was so tired he had to lay down and take a nap. It means that he stopped creating. He's no longer creating. He's done with that. Verse 3, then God blessed the seventh day, and he sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work, which God had created and made. So that's the story of creation in the Bible, reading it literally as a young earth creationist would read it. Now, I didn't tell you earlier, but all of these hypotheses, I had some problems with. Each one I can say, this doesn't quite make sense to me. And with young earth creation, there's some things that don't make sense. One would be how he put the stars in the sky on the fourth day rather than right from the beginning. But I guess maybe I can kind of comprehend that the light was coming from him. Another is radioisotope and radiocarbon dating. Scientists find the age of things by radioisotope dating. And it shows millions and billions of years of age, not 6,000. There's definitely a discrepancy there. And I have to scratch my head and say, what's going on? And then a third thing is, what about all these fossils that we find that are supposedly millions and hundreds of millions of years old? Where'd they come from? How do we explain that? So there's two or three things that I kind of go, I have a little bit of trouble with young earth creation because of these things. Now, next lesson, we're going to talk about this radioisotope dating and radiocarbon dating. I could perhaps skip it, but I'm so much of a scientist, I'll get into it. Hopefully, I won't bore you with it. I want to just touch the treetops enough that you're familiar with it and maybe see some of the problems it has. So, next lesson will be the second one on anthropology, and we'll talk more about some of the hypotheses of creation. Thank you.